Welcome, everybody, to Stay Curious. I'm your host, Mark Marquette. We're broadcasting live from the American Space Museum in downtown Titusville, Florida, and it's my honor to have this special program today with Mr. Jay Honeycutt beside me. Jay, how are you doing? Former Kennedy Space Center director, and Mike McCulley over there, pilot of STS-43, but also very involved as the leader 34. Of the U.S. space.
Just as a
I said 34. Correct? Did I say 43?
Dyslexic.
I got Richard Petty on my mind. Thanks for straightening me out there, and Jim Adamson also. So, yes, 34. The Galileo mission you were pilot of, and they are doing a special tribute today on Mr. George Abbey. This gentleman, let me get the slide up here. Right there's Mr. Abbey. Yeah, you could move it over one of their shoulders there. Let's just make it big there. One of NASA's great leaders. Okay, they're going to tell you why. I'm going to learn a lot about him. But when Jay was Kennedy Space Center director, George Abbey was the Johnson Space Center director, and so much more. And they're going to talk about that here in a great tribute to Mr. Abbey on what would have been his 93rd birthday today, August 21st. We would not have done blank if not for George Abbey. That's what you're going to learn about today. So I told both these wonderful gentlemen that support our American Space Museum, I'm going to step out of the way and give them the floor here. And so let me turn it over to Mr. Jay Honeycutt.
Well, thank you, Mark. George was 5 years older than I and 50 years smarter. So I'm going to try to put some context to his contributions to America's space program and contributions to several of us for the remainder of our careers as well. I've written some notes, so I might be staring down here a little bit, but I don't want to leave anything out. Mike's going to interject along the way with some additional thoughts, and when we get to the end of this little thing I've written, we're going to just throw it back and forth to each other with stories about George, because there's 1,000 of them that can be told. There were 3 ways to know George Abbey. The first was those who worked in an organization that he was responsible for. They knew who he was, what he did. In some cases, they even knew where he sat, but they had little or no direct interface or communication with him. They did realize, however, that the organization functioned smoothly and things got better. Good decisions were made, and they watched the organization grow stronger. The second group either worked directly for him or had multiple opportunities to interface with him, if not on a daily basis, at least a routine basis. What this group saw was a man of amazing intellect, a man with a memory of an encyclopedia, a man with a get-it-done attitude second to none, and a man unafraid to make the difficult decisions when they were needed, not after some long periods of study or indecision.
So all of that stuff is pretty serious stuff. But don't let us think for a second that he didn't have a fun side.
Yeah, and we're gonna get good. I'm gonna discuss the third group here in just a minute.
I'd like to say hi to Susan Abbey watching. She got a hold of me, Jay.
Good.
So
Suzanne.
Okay, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching.
Haven't seen you in a long time, but I'm glad we're connected.
Some highlights of his life and career. He was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, attended the U.S. Naval Academy, entered the Air Force after graduation, where he became a pilot, and he later worked on the DoD's dinosaur program. As the U.S. space program ramped up, he was assigned to NASA's Johnson Space Center, where he worked on the upcoming Apollo program. Shortly thereafter, he left the Air Force and joined NASA full-time. And this was just about the time of the Apollo 1 fire that killed the three crew members to be of the first flight. So George supported George Low in the efforts to get the command and service module fixed after the fire and get it returned to a safe flight configuration. And he worked that as well as all the remainder of the Apollo and Skylab missions. He was instrumental in establishing a positive technical relationship with the Russians during the Apollo-Soyuz test project that enabled a great mission. That relationship has flourished throughout Shuttle Mir, which was the Russian space station, initial space station, and the current International Space Station.
And he, in spite of all the hate and discontent between the two countries right now, and it has been in the past, there was this relationship that George established with Leonov, the Russian Leonov, that he and George built a relationship between the two agencies that just stayed outside all the stuff that was going on worldwide and yet today, and the two agencies still are very close to each other.
After retiring, George joined the faculty at Rice University and continued to be active with the Russians and with the development of national space policy. He sponsored a joint U.S.-Russia International Space Station biomedical conference each year, in which 50 or so Russians would show up in Houston along with a like number of American space programs, and they discussed more things than just medical things, but he covered it under the medical umbrella.
What he did was enable an attitude and support an attitude that if you went to Russia as an astronaut or somebody working in the space program, it was like meeting your old buddies at some favorite place, and it was a relationship that just went way above anything that went on between Russia and the United States at that time.
While at JSC, he refocused the culture of the astronaut office, enabled its growth by creating duties that were defined by their contributions to the areas of space science, earth science, biomedical research, and other science areas that were necessary to achieve mission success. This was the first example of the crew members really going out into the center, working all the technical issues that were being worked for the upcoming shuttle program.
And what that resulted in, by the way, was astronauts were as well known. It reminded me of aircraft carriers, where the pilots are there, but you're down on the flight deck or up on the flight deck, down in the hangar bay. You got this relationship going with all the other groups. And so that when you get in an airplane or a space shuttle, in this particular case, you know that they know you've been out there at night in third shift, and you know you're going to get the best support that you can possibly ever have. And George just fostered that relationship, and it was huge, that relationship.
His expertise in intuition and flight crew selection resulted in shuttle and ISS flight crews who consistently exceeded expectations during their flights.
So can we talk about crew selection, astronaut selection? It was all a mystery. You applied just like you applied for any other civil service job, in fact, and so your paperwork goes off into some bureaucratic world, and I didn't know who George Abbey was at that time, although a lot of the astronaut candidates were a lot smarter about how you go about getting in the middle of this crowd. So I'm out in at Nevada at a secret base, just operated a big operation that day, and I knew that the selection process that was going on, and I get a phone call from a very good friend of mine in Washington, and he said, "Hey, I know you're really wanting to be an astronaut, but I got to tell you, I looked at the list today, and you're not on it." And he told me this other guy, a friend of mine, who was on that list. And I said, "Well, okay, Benny, tell you what, I'm not going to say anything, and I just assume you didn't either. You got it." So off we go. A couple of days later, come back into the hangar out there in the middle of the desert, and actually had a party out back to cook hamburgers and things to celebrate this mission that we'd had. And so I'm out there, and I'm about 3 beers probably into the afternoon, and the duty officer starts banging on the big window up by the payphones, and he's waving at me to come on up. So I went up, and I picked up the phone and said, "Hello." There's just silence. "Hello? Oh, is this Mike McCulley?" "Well, yes, sir, it is. this is George Abbey. And the people who were real into this whole selection process knew that if George called you, you were going to get a you're in answer. I didn't know that.
And if I called you, you didn't make it. So they'd answer when George called, and if I called, they wouldn't answer the phone.
So,
Caller ID.
Yeah.
well, and so I'm standing there, and again, I had about 3 beers in me, and I'm on a payphone, and it's all glass, and the whole squadron was down there in this area where we were cooking hamburgers and hot dogs, and so he said, well, tell me what you're doing. And so I started rambling on about what we were doing that day, and we had bombed San Francisco, and we'd come back around through somewhere else, and I was rambling, and it finally hit me that I was rambling, and I'd met George, but not much beyond that, and as I'm rambling on, it hit me that something's going on here. So I said, I'm stopped. I'll talk no more, or something like that. And he said, well, look, what we were thinking about doing is bringing you down to Houston. And, but it sounds to me like you're having way too much fun. And I don't know that we could talk you out of it. And then it was at that moment that I realized I had been selected. And so I mumbled some more stuff and bubbled around and said, I'll be there tomorrow if you want me to, or some stupid answer. But he said, yeah, I need to get you on down here pretty quick. And that was how I found out that I'd been selected for the astronaut corps. And that was George's style sometimes. It had humor in it. It had seriousness in it. And in the end, it had an answer. I loved him.
I want to say hi to Joycey and Jimmy and Andrew, I think, who signed in.
Yeah, I've been on my phone. They've been
to,
texting me here. Cindy's connected with them there as they all
If
grew
we
up
say
together.
hello, they're hearing us.
Yeah, should hear
Okay.
us.
Yeah, Cindy. Right, Andy's watching, and
Jimmy,
and Jenny. Yep, and Suzanne.
Dr. Abbey, Jimmy. So during a tour in Washington at NASA headquarters and the National Space Council, he played a major role in determining the role of space in future national policy. He then returned to JSC as director and among other things, took over personal direction of the development of the International Space Station. The ISS, excuse me, at this time had, get some water. The ISS at this time had significant issues at the time with elements in various stages of development and no clear indication of who was in charge. George personally held a meeting every Saturday morning, as with required attendance by all project program managers and in some cases corporate CEOs, to discuss program status, milestones, and critical issues. These meetings had some number of names. They finally ended up being called gassers for George Abbey Saturday Reviews.
So, but
Gassers.
a little bit of an aside. But this time I had left the astronaut corps and come to Florida to be part of the ground support processing world down here. And so I knew about those Saturday morning meetings, but I never went to one. In fact, never wanted to go to one. But I heard all those stories about how it all worked and who had to go. And what he did was kick the whole process in the butt and get them going and get them on the same street.
And a little side story. He called me and he said, I've got a whole bunch of people here in Houston that are really good engineers, but they know hardware from a schematic and a telemetry display point of view. They don't really know the hardware touchy-feely point of view. And he said, your guys handle hardware, and you're familiar with hardware, and you understand hardware, and you can recognize problems with hardware. And I need you to send some people into these factories and find out what's going wrong in these factories and why we're not getting this stuff done. So I called one of my best guys, Chip Talone, who had been working stationed down here in Florida, in the office and made one mistake, and I said, "Here's your new opportunity. You're going to get to go do this for George Abbey, and you get 15 first-round draft choices here from the center to go do that." And damn if he didn't take all 15 of them.
Your best people.
And got guys like Bill Parsons and Nicole Stott and Bill Dowdell, one of the best ops guys we had, and Don Scheibel, who's now the deputy director up at the Glenn Research Center, and several more whose names I can't recall now. But he took 15 really good people. We sent them out in the factories, and then they reported back directly to George and helped him as he tried to get all these issues coalesced into a program that was moving forward. I'm absolutely convinced that without those meetings and without his effort because we had the CEO of Boeing at the one that I went to, and I didn't go to his. I went to as few as I could get away with, but I think it's without a doubt that without George, space station would certainly never have gotten there on time, and would have cost a lot more and probably had less capability without his effort.
Along those same lines, the way he brought the corporations and had people coming back and forth, I was working my butt off 7 days a week down here, and I get a phone call. And he says, go up to Huntsville and look around and tell me what you think. Now, how's that for a set of orders? I had no idea. I did what he said. I got a ticket. I flew up to Huntsville. I didn't have a point of contact. I didn't have anything. And there was a company that was working on a lot of stuff up in Huntsville, and they were having trouble. And he said, I want you to go fix it. I didn't work for that company. They didn't know me. I showed
up. You
up.
didn't work for him, you worked for me.
So I go off to Huntsville, and I show up one morning at this meeting, and they had no idea who I was and what I was doing. And so I remember saying, I don't remember if I used George's name or not. I just said, you guys have had some problems, and we're doing really well in Florida, and I've got orders to come up here and look around and maybe tell you if I can find something. Now imagine how awful that was taken by the company I was talking to. But I did it because George told me to, and George knew what effect that would have, and it did. They changed some things around, and for me it was an eye-opener, and nobody ever sent me into a corporation that didn't know me and didn't like me and didn't want me and told me to go fix them.
We're enjoying a conversation here about Mr. George Abbey, whose birthday's today, and we've got his family members watching, even at the Johnson Space Center with interns and so forth. Thank you so much for watching. George passed away in March a year ago, and you two, particularly Mr. Honeycutt, very, very great friends with this leader. And it's our privilege at the American Space Museum to honor him and let you see some of the hidden figures, if you will, to some of the people out there watching today. And I just wanted to mention we've got Tom and Mark Usiaker in Pennsylvania. We've got a good guy, Steve Jokums, who you met at Shuttlefest, Jay, in Illinois. Gary Gerald is our onion farmer in Georgia. Dean Babcock's in Illinois. We got, I was looking at here, who's up in Dundee, Scotland, is Robert Law, watching from Dundee, Scotland. And a gentleman I saw the other day, Jim Banky, says, can you talk about George and crew selection? I remember seeing more than one astronaut clearly schmoozing up to George at pre-launch activities.
Hey, Jim.
And Jim says hi to Peggy and Jane.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but
I saw his picture in something the other day. I didn't know he was still around, but he's
Yes, Jim's doing great.
yeah.
And those of you that know him, he was bragging to me. He's lost over 200 pounds.
Oh, good
Wow.
for him!
Bit-
Wow,
yeah.
Wow.
Trying to get healthy and all. Big Jim is part of the National Space Club, and was on the Colcom Award selection committee that I was bestowed upon last year. So, a great guy out there. I've read. You want to say something more about crew selection since Jim brought that up? Either one of you. There's a lot of hilarious stories out there. Jay, why don't you tell me what you told me about when an astronaut made it to the big table there? What was
well,
his
yeah, I
chan-
mean, you know,
chances?
the first time we did that was in 1977, where we were going to select the group of shuttle astronauts that became the 35 new guys, and we had previously selected pilots, and we had previously selected scientists, but as soon as we got the scientists, we tried to make pilots out of them, sent them all out to fly jets and all that sort of stuff. This time, George decided we were going to have pilots, and we were going to have what he called mission specialists that were going to be engineers or scientists that were going to be flight engineers, if you will, and help execute all the responsibilities that would go on during the flight. So we put out an announcement. We got 7,000 applications. There was a little trailer. The kids will remember this. There was a little trailer back there between the main part of JSC and the Gilruth Center that they set up. And we reviewed, George and I personally reviewed all 7,000 of those first
Really?
first
Wow.
invitations, and we narrowed it down to 220 people we were going to interview. And so then we broke them into classes of mission specialists and pilots. We'd bring in 20 at a time, 20 pilots, 20, and then the next week would be 20 mission specialists. And the process was, and I think it was the same when Mike came through. You showed up on Sunday, and Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening you went over to the King's Inn, which was a local motel there, and George and John Young would come and talk to candidates about what the job was, what we were trying to do, and tell them a little bit about what's going to happen to the week. And then they would go through the medical gauntlet of all the tests that they had to go through, including, I guess, talking to the Franks, and then they got a interview with the board, and the board was a cross section of across the center, and we had a guy from a PhD from Goddard that served on it, and 3 or 4 astronauts and 3 or 4 of the senior staff at JSC, and then we go through their resume, if you will, what their experiences was, and what how we felt they fit into the program. And then George always had a zinger, where he would ask some off the wall question. In today's environment, it might be, well, what do you think about tariffs? Or it might be, how do you think we could solve this problem with Gaza? Some, off the wall question that we pretty sure they hadn't been prepping for, and it was interesting to see how they reacted to it. Some took to it, the other one went, and but they would last about an hour, a little over an hour maybe, and then next week same routine. And this went on for about a year. We brought people in 20 at a time, pilots and mission specialists, and pilots and mission specialists. I don't know, you went through from the other side of the table, you went through that as well.
Well, that was quite a huge, the 35 new guys and girls. And, that was our future for our space age. You took some notes there, Mike.
Well, that whole process was, none of us had ever been through anything like that before. And in fact, I was the ops officer in an air wing on USS Nimitz on a Friday afternoon. And I knew the selection process was going on, but I'd never been a groupie on that whole process. And I was ops officer, and the next week we had this big nuclear power proficiency inspection going on. It was my baby. And so George's secretary for the selection committee, you remember her name?
Yeah, but I can't tell what it is.
So I get a phone call on this Friday.
Wasn't Cheryl Armstrong?
No. It was, and I get this phone call, and this is the astronaut office.
Teresa, wasn't it?
Teresa Gomez. Yeah. This is the selection office, and we need you down here on Sunday to start the interview process. And I was in shock. A nuclear proficiency inspection in the military is either the beginning or end of your career. And I just said to her, I stumbled and I said, I can't do that. We've got this thing starting on Monday, I rambled on, and I said, I can't do it, and I hung up. So I went back to work, and I didn't know and didn't ask if this was the last selection week or not, when it turned out it was. So I had turned down NASA. Well, it took about an hour for George to get us back to George. So they went into George and said, McCulley says he's not going to come because he's got something more important. Well, George called somebody, and George had all these admirals that were in his back pocket, at least as far as astronaut selection was concerned, and generals as well. So it goes up to D.C., a couple admirals, comes back down, and my skipper came in and said, what did you tell NASA? And I was kind of shocked. I said, look, they called me and said, be here. And I said, I can't do it because I got this inspection. And he looked at me and he said, you're ordered to go to Houston. Yes, sir. And no money, no orders, no nothing. I got a flight, took off. It was Sunday afternoon. Those little bottles of wine, those small bottles they used to give you on the airplanes. I had a couple of them going down to, because I'd been told to leave. And I was told that my responsibilities were all behind me, not to worry about it, not to do anything. So I got on the airplane out of Norfolk and flew to Atlanta and had a couple of wines, got out of Atlanta, heading for Houston, had a couple more wines. And then I get down there, and as Jay just said, I find out we're starting that afternoon with urine inspections and there were bottles, and we got a meeting with John Young, the chief of the office, and I was half drunk. And I'm not, I didn't realize all of this. I was not a groupie. I didn't understand anything in this whole process. And Jay knew it all, but he hadn't told me because I didn't know him yet. And I'm making this story long, but it's just the way that George would do things and expect you to respond without even having to tell you to respond. There's 100 examples, but you knew if he told you to do something, you did it. Even, I got a note here someplace, not always why. He tell you to do it, you do it. So, and it turns out, it was funny, there was another friend of mine from the Navy who was there that week, big time smoker. And he had quit smoking on Saturday. And so we go through that whole week with urinalysis and all these tests and the psychology folks, and he ended up flunking because he had nicotine in his pee. So he didn't get it. And then, so I just took that week off, and it was really interesting to watch. And Jay saw it. I just decided they've ordered me down here. This is something I'd really like to do. And I got very, very relaxed that whole week. I didn't worry about anything. In fact, Claudette Gage was a nurse who ran the medical part of this thing. And she asked me that last day, pulled me aside and said, do you care if you're selected or not. And I was shocked, but I was so relaxed with the whole process, and I think that's a big part of why. Carolyn Huntoon was on the selection board on that table Jay talked about. I must have called her sir 20 times because I was a Navy guy, and she threatened to throw me out of the room if I called her sir one more time, and I said yes sir. And she put her hands up and gave up on me. And it was that kind of stuff though that I loved it. I loved the idea of coming down there, but I wasn't. A lot of those folks, as Jay saw, were tighter than a damn drum all week. They couldn't answer a question. They couldn't do anything. And it was really interesting to watch that whole process take place. And that's all I'll say about that.
Well, great insight there.
Yeah,
I'm going to turn over to you there.
The other thing that was interesting is the military guys. We were getting Air Force guys, we were getting Navy guys, and we were getting Marines. And by the end of the detailed process, if a guy came in and sat down and said three sentences, I could tell you what branch of the service he was in. I mean, there was such a distinction between the three services, how they thought, how they acted, what their background was, et cetera, et cetera. And what a little story about never say no to George. There was a guy at Edwards that he wanted to interview, and so we called the Air Force. I had a guy that I interfaced with at Randolph that was their sort of handler for the astronauts, and we said, we'd like to interview this guy. Could you send him to Houston? And again, it's last week, and he needs to come next week. So the guy calls me back and he said, well, that guy's got orders to Greenland, and they've already sent his furniture up there. And I said, well, okay. So I go in, I tell George, we're not going to get to interview him. And he says, call Tom Stafford, who at that time was a 3-star in the Pentagon, but had just left Edwards as a director out there. And he said, call Tom. So I called General Stafford and I said, here's the story. And he said, I'll get back to you. And literally in an hour, this guy from Randolph calls me and he says, who do you know? And I said, I ain't telling you. But the guy showed up. They rewrote his orders and sent him. Turns out he didn't make it, but he got a job in the control centers as one of the military detailees.
Before we move off the astronaut selection with Jay, you've told me that that's just a small part of what George Abbey did, but of course it's a fun thing to talk about. Marty and I had dinner with Mike Baker, twice a pilot, twice a commander. And I asked Bakes, we getting to know him pretty good, and I said he'd had a few pops, and I said, hey, Bakes, how was that interview with your astronaut thing? Tell me about that with Mr. Abbey. And he said, well, he says, I get there, and it's a T of a shape there table. You're right there in the corner. And George looked up from my resume, and he said to me, well, I see you graduated from the University of Texas. So you didn't get a very good education, huh? And I go, Bakes, what'd you say? He said, first it threw me, and then I said, I did the best I could. But if you'd been a Buckeye from Ohio State, maybe George wouldn't have said that. I don't know. But that's my only comment about it. Just shared what you guys had a lot of fun with that. Yeah. And you basically told me once you got that interview, any of those guys, men and women,
well,
could have been an astronaut.
I mean, they were cream of the crop. You could almost done that and got, people that could have done a great job. One other similar story though, Pinky Nelson showed up and we're doing his interview and George he would sit there and he would do this and he every once in a while he'd mumble a question and so he asked and we had a softball team and George was the manager of our softball team and we had a doubleheader for the championship that night. And so they're interviewing, and he asked Pinky, he said, well, what do you do in your spare time up there in Seattle? Well, I play on 3 different softball teams. What are you doing tonight?
Really?
So he showed up, and we won. He went, got 3 home runs.
What positions you play?
I was the pitcher.
Pitcher.
George was a catcher. I was a pitcher.
Marty Winkle, your friend and mine's on our board over there. Marty's got a question from one of our viewers.
Yeah, we got a question from Jim Banky again. A follow-up to clarify, how did George pick the cruise to fly? It's always been a big mystery.
No one knows. He and John picked them. That's all. I never was privy to the selection process.
Yeah.
I never had any discussion with him, and I was pretty close to him most of the time when he was selecting the cruise. But he had an innate talent for picking this one and this one and this one and this one, and knowing that they would mesh together as a crew, as a team. He just had, but between he and John Young, they just were remarkable in their ability to put the right people together, and he got a lot of that from back from these assignments that he had given people to go work over here, go work over there, go work with this, with this group. He could see who fit in with strangers better than some of the others did, and he just had a talent. But what it was, I don't have any idea. Well, I first went to work for George in 1975, right after the Apollo Soyuz test program. And since that time, I've probably seen him make 1,000 tough decisions. Never saw him once make one that was the benefit of George. He always tried to do what was best for NASA, the program, and for the USA. And now it comes to the third way to get to know George. This way was as his friend. And this is where I start to lose it. Those of us in that group were indeed the lucky ones, because we really did know George. In a sense, he was always at work, always willing to talk NASA or space-related things, but he had a myriad of outside interests, causes, and team-building ideas to bring to the table. And I'm going to read a short list of them, and Mike can help me with these. Chili cook-offs, I think they're in the 40th year of chili cook-offs now at the center. Started with 2 or 3 teams, and probably now they got, they had.
And again,
15 or 20.
on chili cook-offs, they're a huge deal. It's actually at the Johnson Space Center, and now down here as well, or they were for a while. And so our group had been aboard for a month or 2, or a little bit longer perhaps. And he called one day with Jim Adamson and I, and he called us over to the office, and he said, "There's a chili cook-off coming, and you guys need to make a team." And that was all the directions we had. So we go off and talk to Jay and these other folks. And so our group put together a team. Adamson was already on another team because he'd been there. Long story short, all these guys have been around forever, had all this experience with chili cook-offs. And so this new group of astronauts comes in, throw some chili together, and we won. It was a huge shock to the whole system that you guys won, and it was so much fun. And then we just kept doing it. I mean, he put that together, and that was one of the best way to combine people.
And that was when Earl Campbell was playing with the Oilers.
Oh yeah, he was
the Oilers were still in town, and one year Earl Campbell showed up. I mean, you never knew who was going to be there. Another thing that he did was he started. There's 1,600 acres on the Johnson Space Center, and 10 of them maybe got buildings on them. The rest of them is a lot of big field out on the west side as you go in. Well, he got the idea to bring the national cow of Texas, the Longhorns, into the center. So first thing you know, there's a dozen Longhorns with horns out. And the schools from the entire Clear Lake area, kids are there now, interfacing and learning about not only space but about livestock as well. And that thing is still going on gangbusters there in Houston. Right when you go in where their rocket park is, the Longhorn Center is right
Yeah, I
there.
saw a picture of Longhorns
right
there, and they named that building after him, I believe, the Saturn
Where the Saturn V is.
V
Yeah.
building there.
Uh,
Joyce says it's 44 years of cook-offs.
The rodeo, the Houston Livestock Rodeo, is one of, if not the biggest rodeo in the world, and he was a big supporter of that, particularly with the calf scrambles. He would go, he would buy a calf and then go out there and try to catch it in the scramble and do all kinds of things to support the rodeo. One of my personal favorites is George met a guy down in south of the center, an older guy, Mr. Casey, and Mr. Casey at that time raised dogs or cared for dogs some way, but he had been whatever year the Olympics got canceled for World War II. He had been, the tug of war used to be an Olympic event, and Mr. Casey had been on the I think it was Irish or Scottish.
He was Irish.
Irish tug of war team, so he knew how to do tug of war. So George had some friend of his had a kid at Texas A&M that was a defensive tackle, and he was about 800 pounds, and we got him to be the anchor guy, and then he got a bunch of little guys looked like me and Ned and Mike, and he put us on the rope and he taught us how to pull, because there's a science to tug of war. It's not just how strong you are; it's how you get your feet and how you pull and make sure you keep everybody in sync. So we go downtown. They had, in those days in Houston, they had these Highland games, which they tossed the caber, which is this 20-foot pole, and they tossed it up, and they tossed a stone. We had Jack Lousma was our stone
Really?
tugger. So we go down and we enter this team in the tug of war, and again we won. We beat the Houston Fire Department and the Houston Police Department. Pulled them all over the damn football field, and the prize for winning the tug of war was you got a keg of beer. So we got the keg of beer and we set it up in the corner with the Houston Fire Department and the police guys, and we would drink that beer. We did that 2 years in a row.
I'd seen the Highland Games up in the Blue Ridge Mountains up there in North Carolina. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The big pole, telephone pole.
The caber. That's called a caber.
Okay.
And then he would go every year. He'd go to Paris for the dinner to honor Robert Burns, and which is a big deal over there with the poets of the world. And he would drag some of us with him to that event. He would go for 20 years plus. He went to the Celtic Band Festival in Lorient, France, dragging people, primarily Constable Bill Bailey, along with him to that. We'd go down to one of the local watering holes, Griff's, to go to Astro games, and then there was the Abbey Watch, and the I call Abbey Watch the team building on a smaller scale, because that was where George would go at night to have a glass of wine or two, and certain people would show up to talk with him and have wine. And the trick was don't be the last one there, because then you had to stay. He was ready. He was
Till he
ready to
went
leave.
home,
So
huh?
that became known as the Abbey Watch, and more than one of us got the opportunity to be the last one at the.
And we
at
had
the-
we had to take it on with a right attitude.
That's right. All of this was fun, and he was always disappointed if you didn't join in on the revelry.
Let me mention a couple comments here from, this one's from Suzanne. She said, ask them if they know which chili cook-off team had their chili parachuted in for judging.
Red Barons?
Maybe Red Barons. I don't know.
Maybe Red Barons, okay. And we've got, they're typing it in there again. And from Johnson Space Center and all the interns watching, thank you for staying curious with us. This is Joyce Abbey says, ask Mike about the fajita party.
Oh my goodness. Hi, Joyce. Thank you. Well, it was all part of learning. And
Okay.
and so, and fajitas in Texas, they're not called cook-offs, but they're called something. Anyway, it's a huge deal, and I thought I knew something, and I didn't know squat. And it all showed up when I tried to act like I knew something. Thank you, Joyce.
First submariner in space, huh? Can't
Yeah.
cook fajitas.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for watching. I'll let Mr. Honeycutt continue here.
Well, George was a great mentor. When you had an opportunity to work directly for him, you always benefited. Two examples of that are here today, and I could also name a NASA administrator, an aerospace CEO, several industry leaders, 3 NASA center directors, and a shuttle program manager who worked directly for him, and benefited from his mentorship. He was a great gift giver. If you got a gift from George at Christmas or your birthday or whatever, you could see he put a lot of thought into it, and it was always appropriate to the occasion. And one final note, George was very, very caring. It was his friend. If you were his friend, you were his friend no matter what. He kept up with all of them. I remember when the secretary used to put an inch thick pile of yellow phone messages on his desk almost every day, and half of those would be business related, and the other half would be friends just checking in. My final memory is a personal one. Several years ago, I was in Methodist Hospital with a pretty serious condition for over a month, and George was down at Rice at the Baker Institute at the time. Every day in the afternoon when he was leaving Rice at quitting time, he'd come by my hotel room to check on me. If it happened to be a weekend or he was out of town, he would call and check on me. You don't find many friends like that anywhere. For all his accomplishments, I consider 4 to be the ones that made him who he was. Tops of the list is personnel development, from the people in the astronaut office to the people who had the opportunity to work directly for him, for the people that he managed. All benefited from George's leadership. As Mike mentioned, the U.S.-Russian cooperation would not have succeeded, would not have even started really without his effort, and it certainly wouldn't have succeeded for the 50-plus years that it's been going on. And as Mike mentioned, it's remarkable. We started in the middle of the Cold War, through all the changes that have been made up until today, and still the relationship between the Russian people and the Russian space people and the U.S. space program is still as strong, I think, as it ever was. The development of the ISS, like I mentioned earlier, wouldn't be there if it wasn't for George. And most people that run NASA centers don't have much of a connection with the community. They tend to isolate themselves behind their own walls, and he certainly was not that way, and his efforts to integrate the Johnson Space Center into the local Clear Lake community, I don't think can be underscored. He was just terrific. And then I think maybe we just shoot the bull for a little bit.
Well,
His community involvement there said a little more here. George William Samuel Abbey. Not many people with two middle initials, but I saw that WS. Did you ever tease him about that or
Oh,
anything?
I got all kinds of guesses as to what that
WS meant.
William Sherman will shout, you know.
Born in Seattle, Washington. Okay. On March 24th, August 21st today, 1932. He passed away March 24th. And Jay, I'll remember that. You and I were working on our project that Saturday, and when you got that phone call, I could tell your whole demeanor changed, and you just said, a friend of mine is sick and I gotta go. And then I realized how much this man meant to you. And as a friend, you were also the director of Kennedy Space Center the same years that he was at Johnson Space Center. That had to be a lot of fun, because I know you had a lot of fun doing that. Did he ever come here much?
No, he'd come down for launches.
Uh-huh. I wanted to show a couple pictures here. Again, you've been hearing a program about Mr. George Abbey. We would not have done blank if not for George Abbey. And you rattled off a whole bunch of things there that honor him. There was just a couple pictures. There he is with John Young in the T-38. I think the caption said going from Ellington to over here to a launch. He was a Air Force pilot, could fly, and he would go and talk to the astronauts a lot wherever they were. There we've got Janet Cavandy and the late Janice Voss, and is that Luke Eiholtz or who did that guy? I had a European ESA astronaut. How hard of a decision? I mean, what was the decision process like for him to name the first women astronauts?
It was pretty easy.
I mean,
he decided he was going to do it. Dr. Kraft was the center director. Kraft was supportive of doing that, and
how'd they get along? The great Chris Kraft and Mr. George Abbey. How'd they get along?
Oh, great, yeah.
Is that
great,
I've not read too many things about it. I've read Chris's book, Kraft's book there, but
Speaking of books, there's a book called Astronaut Maker by Mike McCulley that's about George, and I recommend it.
Carlton Bailey, one of our viewers, recommended that book. There's a book out that is very good to read.
McCulley he's the same guy that did Tom Stafford's book, and George. Because I asked George, I said, how did you pick, or why did you pick him? He said, well, Tom recommended him. So he and Tom were, George and Tom Stafford were really close.
Mm-hmm. The general, great. Yeah, we've got Mr. Ed Wilson here watching, who was a security officer.
He was in charge of me for several years when I was fresh down here, and I had more of a Navy attitude than I did corporate attitude for a while.
Uh-huh.
And occasionally you'd have to correct me.
Taking care of Mike was occasionally harder than Vietnam.
It was. Well, Mr. Wilson said that Mr. Abbey definitely commanded a room, and his presence was, shall we say, acknowledged by everybody there. Because when he talked, people listened, right?
Yeah. On the cover of Cassal's book, there's a quote from Dick Truly, who was the NASA administrator at one point, and where Dick says that the real book about manned space flight would be a story about George Abbey.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Hope you're enjoying this tribute to Mr. George Abbey on what would have been his 93rd birthday. We've got several of his children watching. We so glad that you found our humble American Space Museum. I cannot tell you in just, well, I'll just say in one sentence, but I could go on for an hour, how both these two gentlemen have helped this museum. Mr. McCulley's been involved in this museum for over 20 years. You have done a lot of fundraising. You've done a lot of goodwill for our museum, and Mr. Honeycutt the same way. And these are the type of NASA leaders and astronauts that we love to attract at our museum. So if you're new to us, check back with us. We've been doing this podcast for 5 years. Marty Winkle, my co-producer, worked on the lunar modules as a lead electrical engineer.
And we were co-workers.
And then
Marty.
he worked for and then he was an SSME engine guy. And when you were leader at the United Space Alliance, yep, you were a part of Marty's world there.
He was part of mine.
So
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject all that. You got something to share, Mike? And Marty's got a few questions out there.
Let's go with the questions.
Okay, we got a question from Dean Babcock. If Mr. Abbey was in charge of NASA today, how different would the Artemis program look?
Well, it would look like it was going to work.
Yeah.
I mean, I
And
can't.
go back for that, the guy who asked the question, go back to what Jay was talking about, the every Saturday morning meeting, for example. The station was a mess, and a lot of things were a mess. And George, I mean, how many guys in NASA civil service could order CEOs to show up on a Saturday morning for a meeting? And but George did that. He could pull stuff together, and that's, if he was in Artemis right now, it would be working or gone.
Yeah, but
Is that close enough?
the current plan doesn't look too.
You got a
Looks
question?
very challenging.
I know Mr. Honeycutt's biting his tongue and being a lot politically correct. Conversations we have is
So who is it, Marty? What's the guy who asked that question? Who is that, or gal?
His name is Dean Babcock.
It's a good but loaded question,
yeah.
in my opinion.
And Mr. Honeycutt's going to share some of that with us one day on here. And I got a thing to plug, and I'll just plug it right now. If you're local and you want to hear Mr. Honeycutt talk a little bit about how NASA may have lost its way, he's our inaugural speaker at our NASA Legends Dinner at the Italian American Club in Melbourne, a mini fundraiser for the museum. We hope to do these every other month at least. $50 per person dinner, and have a dinner and meet Jay, and he's going to do our program, and we'll show our video project that he's put together of NASA's human space flight that Nicole Stott is our narrator for that project that I was privileged to work with you with. So but yes, we hope to do some of that. And I had a question here from one of the kids. Do they remember the Superman birthday? Jim Bagian.
Bayesian.
I said,
Yeah, Bayesian. Yeah, I guess he repelled off of the headquarters buildings.
He did.
Somehow or another. He was a remarkable.
That's from
fellow.
Suzanne. There.
Yeah, I remember that.
And if you have something you want them to keep the questions coming in here, we'll have to talk for a few more minutes. Marty, go ahead.
You got a question from Tom Usiak. A few astronauts started as mission specialists. Steve Nagel comes to mind, and eventually became a commander. Why weren't they selected as pilots in the first place?
I can't remember, but there were several pilots that were picked as mission specialists. I mean, there were some limits on the number of slots you had available. So in some cases, people that were pilots, as who made their living being a pilot got picked as a mission specialist. Just
Well,
because.
in Group 10, my selection group, Mark Brown was an Air Force pilot selected as a mission specialist. Lacey Veach was an Air Force pilot and a Thunderbird at one point, selected as a mission specialist. Might even have been one more, but anyway, even as late as
Steve, I think Steve was Joe Tanner, I believe was.
who pilot selected as
Yeah,
mission specialist.
Yeah,
What about John Blaha? He was a mission specialist, become a
No, he was one of the pilots.
he was chosen as a pilot.
Yeah.
In there. Marty's got our list here of who's watching today. Stay curious with us here. We've got Alex Honeycutt's watching. Hey, Alex. N.J. Pepper. Doug Forrest is in Los Angeles. N.J. Pepper, thank you for joining our social hour here today. Mitch Rothman is a great supporter of our museum, and he's in Colorado. Elena Adhikari watches almost every day from South Africa. Dave Stangy's up in Michigan. Jim Banky. John the Beagle Dad's watching. Mark Usiak. Carlton Bailey. Cindy's watching here. Alias Fox Shade. All right. Bob Mayran. He's down in Miami. Tommy Usiak photographed a bunch of over 70 shuttle launches on the pad there. Andrew Abbey. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed these gentlemen honoring your dad. Robert Laub up in Dundee, Scotland. Steve Jokums up in Illinois. You met Steve over Shuttle Fest. Gary Gerald, Dean Babcock, and R.G. Jubilee. So glad that R.G. Jubilee, alias Rosalie Graziano's watching. We met her at the memorabilia show over the weekend here. Gentlemen, I'm so honored that you take your time to do this about your friend. We're sitting around, we're 3 or 4 pops or wines or whatever into the conversation. What did George Abbey like to talk about? Sports, Celtic music?
He was a lot of it was business. I mean, space business. I mean, he knew everything, but primarily the conversations I had with him were generally revolved around some space related
So on a non-serious note, I recall one day that Jim Adams and I were over in the astronaut office doing something, and the secretary said, "Mr. Abbey's on the phone." "Yes, sir." And the long and short of it was Andrew had driven the household Lincoln out into the middle of a swamp.
Uh-oh, Andrew.
And George ordered us to go fix it. So some conversations were business, deep and personal. Other conversations were.
I mean, there's 1,000 of them. Tom Short, who was the head of Rockwell during the Apollo program in Houston, he was a lead Houston guy, and after Apollo, we decided to move to Calgary, Alberta. He's going to start a oil drilling company or something up there. Lived over in Friendswood, and he had a vehicle and some TV and some other stuff that he didn't have enough drivers to drive the thing up to Calgary. So George said, "We'll take it up there to you." This is in February.
Oh my gosh.
And so then he gave me the opportunity to go with him, and also John Llewellyn, who was a classic in his own case. He was a retrofire officer in Apollo, an ex-Marine, and this was the time that the Vietnam draft thing was going on, and people were running off to Canada to avoid the draft. And John had this big full beard, and his hair was kind of long. So anyway, the three of us take off in this SUV thing with a TV set and a bunch of other crap in the car, and in the middle of February, and we take off for Calgary. And so and George says, well, Bill Stovall, who was one of the flight dynamics officers during Apollo, had left NASA and married a lady in Cheyenne, Wyoming, who was inheriting a beer distributorship. And so George says, well, we need to go by there and see Stovall. So we go, we drive, rotating, three drivers. We never stopped rolling, and we got up to Cheyenne, and Stovall gave us these little cans of beer. There were 6 of them in a little bitty can, about a half a beer, and and he gave us a whole bunch of them, and we didn't have any place to put them, so we stuffed them in all the spare places in that van, and we took off. We took off, and we get up in Montana somewhere, and we were on the interstates, and Abbey's got the map, and he said, well, we can take this country road here through the mountains, and we can cut off 2 hours off the trip. So we turn and we start up that thing, and I went in the back to sleep, and I woke up. I thought somebody had draped a sheet over the car because it was snowing so thick you couldn't see from me to Mike. And they're arguing about how to drive in the snow without snow tires. And but we get to the border, and Short had told us that he was going to have somebody there that would escort us through customs, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. Well, we get there, and of course that guy ain't there, and they start in on the car, and they find a little beer over here, and find some more beer up here, and they find some, and all of a sudden they took the three of us and they put us in 3 different rooms, and they interrogated us so they could compare notes, because they figured that Llewellyn was running from the draft board, and they didn't know what. So finally we talked our way out of the thing, and they said, okay, you can go, but you got to drive straight from here to the customs yard in Calgary, and we know exactly how long it takes to get there, and if you're 30 minutes later than that appointed time, we're going to have you arrested. So we get up there, and Short thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. We however, didn't think it was all that humorous. But that was the kind of stuff you got when he got his creative juices running.
Very interesting here, talking about Mr. George W.S. Abbey. We've got the Sharon Camarillo ring a bell. She says, I'm a big friend and fan from California. She says, Mr. Abbey loved the Houston Rodeo, Bill and Janice Bailey.
Yeah, Constable Bailey, yeah.
Calf Scramble, which you said he would buy a calf, and Jameson Irish coffee. All right. Little Irish coffee, huh? George was a genuine human being. And that's from Sharon Camarillo. Thank you, Sharon, for staying curious today.
God
Marty,
bless you, girl.
what
Thank
got
you.
Yeah, I think we're shut down. Just got an error message.
No, we're live. We're broadcasting.
Okay.
Yep, I'm looking over here. Everything's going good here as we're winding down. Robert Law loved it. Thierry Galu, thanks so much for the ASA team for organizing this hour in the honor of our friend George. Warmest regards from France. Thierry, good dude there. So, no, we're broadcasting, Marty. Everything's good there.
George is huge friends with Jean-Luc Chrétien, the French astronaut that flew both on the shuttle and on the Soyuz. But
Which one?
Jean-Luc Chrétien.
Yes, and we will not tell the story about Home Depot in that astronaut here.
no.
But for you can't go down an aisle in Home Depot. There's a good reason for that. That they've got it blocked off on there. Well, guys, I just thank you. As you see, we love doing these interviews with space workers. And one thing to you, Mike, Jay said that you really were sort of like George's right-hand person for a period of time, a couple years or something. What role were you at there when you were?
Well, it was after the Challenger accident, and I was what was called a Bubba at that time. It was like a gopher for George.
Yeah.
And we
Well,
were
it's more than that.
Yeah.
I was a Bubba.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out
I hope I'm your last Bubba.
Bubba was named after me.
There you go.
so. We're up
Louisiana rules.
We're up in George's office, and there's 10,000 requests from around the United States for an astronaut to come and visit and have a ceremony, and I was the Bubba, and so I was sort of telling him what the plan was and how we're going to do. And John Young was sitting there, and P.J. Whites, who was the deputy in the astronaut office, and George. And 2 or 3 times I stopped George from talking. And as it turns out, I didn't know. Nobody did that. And I said to George, and this changed my nickname forever. I said, George, things are falling into place. Just leave me alone. Let me work. And it was simple. It was me talking like a Navy ops officer. P.J. Whites told me right after that meeting, and he was the deputy chief of the astronaut corps, that my career was over. And he said it to me seriously. Nobody's ever told George to wait, to sit down. And so my nickname from George for the rest of my life has been FIP. Things are falling into place.
FIP.
But it was,
FIP.
I didn't know how not to, he told me to make a plan.
Uh-huh.
So you start making a plan, and George would do this with a lot of things. He'd tell you to go create a document, and you'd start telling him what you did, and he'd interrupt. And he'd interrupt. Why'd you do that? Why didn't you do this? And you could make the changes on the fly that he wanted, or you could just stick to your guns. And that's when I stuck to my guns. PJ said, you're going to get fired, and George changed my name to FIP.
The first week I went to work for him, on like a Wednesday, and the guy who was the local congressman down here at that time, before Bill Nelson got to be the local congressman, I can't remember that guy's name, but anyway, he had submitted a bill in the Congress to move the astronauts to KSC from Houston. So I go in there. I've been in there a full day and a half. And George says, we got to work this weekend. We got to answer this question. And okay, so I come in the next morning. Well, for Saturday and Sunday, literally, we put together a document about this thick that he had every single solitary person in Houston at the Johnson Space Center could not do their job if the astronaut office wasn't there. He had laced all the boxes together in such a fashion that you couldn't possibly extract the astronauts and move them down here.
And that goes back to what you mentioned earlier about his intellect.
Yeah.
He
saw it all.
He saw it all, and he could articulate it, and he'd order you to go do part of it without telling you why, and so you just go did it.
And
Go did it.
this Bubba thing that he was talking about, he started that with Kraft when he was working up at Kraft. It was the only place in the agency where the senior leadership was bring people up from the bowels of the organization and for limited periods of time and let them see what went on on the ninth floor.
Well, you were Bubba 1.
I actually was number 3. Dick Trulier was number one, and somebody else was number two. But I got the name because when George went down to the 8th floor to run flight ops, Pete Clements came in to replace him as Kraft's number 3 guy, and Pete gave me the name of Bubba, and it stuck. So everybody then has been one. So when I got down here, I started saying program in shuttle ops,
Mm-hmm.
and then when I went up to the 4th floor, I had a Bubba, and most everybody in the organization.
I got a Bubba living across the street from me.
And now, I think I know they got them at Marshall, and they got them at headquarters, and they got them out at Johnson, and I think the other centers as well. So that single little program he started with Kraft just went out all over the center, and it's a wonderful opportunity for young people to learn. You know, I always told them that that my expression was that the view through the knothole depends on what side of the fence you're standing on,
Mm-hmm.
because these guys up here make a decision. The guys down here think, well, that's about the dumbest thing I've ever heard them do. What in the world are they doing that for? Well, these guys over here got data that you don't have, and that helps them formulate what you want to do without having, without the people down in the lower levels understanding why you did it. But so the idea was to get sort of a pipeline that says, well, yeah, they're doing that, but trust me, they got a reason, because I saw all that worked when I was up there. But it's incredibly a significant program for individual development.
It's in there. It's in here in his notes on how George developed people and developed leadership qualities, and he would give you plenty of rope to hang yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But then he would, if he liked what you were doing, he'd let you go far as you could, and then he'd rein you in.
Well, we have on our wall here, Jay, one of your statements I think also comes from Mr. Abbey. Here's how we can, not why we can't.
Well, that one actually I dreamed up when I got down here, because
That was a Bubba thought, huh? Okay.
well,
But we love that, because I love that mantra too.
people keep giving me briefings, and they keep telling me why they couldn't.
Yeah, right.
You
That's the
know.
first thing. We don't have room for that. We
Yeah,
don't
we
have
don't
a
have any
budget
money,
for
or
that.
we
Where are we
don't
going
have
to
any-
put
and
it?
to-
Yeah.
Go back to that for a second, because part of George's development, and he didn't come to KSC or any other centers very much, but I was in line to go fly as a commander. And we're over here in a restaurant someplace with Honeycutt and me and Jim Adamson, and they said, are you ready to get a real job? That's your quote. Like that. And well, I gotta go. I'm gonna go be a commander. I gotta do this. Gotta do that. No. And so what came out of that was I left the astronaut corps, flown once, had the opportunity to come down here and take over. And astronauts had left the astronaut corps and come to KSC and gone into NASA management jobs. Dick Truly did. Many others did. You did. I was the first one, I think, that left the astronaut corps and went to the bowels of the company. And Marty knows I was be out here at 5:30 in the morning and maybe go home at 5:30 in the afternoon. But I called George.
Captain Happy, I think he was known as, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was an insult from
Captain Happy.
one of them.
When he was COO of United Space Alliance.
So I called George and I said, what am I doing? And you know what I'm doing or what they're trying, and tell me what, don't tell me what to do, I think. But anyway, he gives me an answer that's like, they need you. And that was all they said. He didn't say another word. He didn't say, stay because I'm going to fly you again. He didn't say, quit and go home. He just said, we need you in Florida. And you know, I with George, he said, turn left, I turn left. And
Yeah,
that
when-
wasn't my style in life.
Yeah.
but with him I did.
When I came down here, McCartney was the center director, and then Bob Crippen became the director. And when Cripp left, they offered headquarters offered me the job, and I had gotten a little bit disillusioned, and was looking around for a job, and so I told him I didn't want it, and this was on a Friday, and I was living down there on Carmine in Cocoa Beach, and I was out in the garage working on something, and the phone rang, and it was George. He said, "Are you out of your mind?" I said, "What?" He said, "You tell them you want that job." And so, yes, sir. So Monday morning, I called him and said, "I second thoughts, I'll take it." And I mean,
He
it was
could,
the
he could
biggest
do a
thing
better
ever happened
job.
to me.
He could do a better job of
Hmm.
putting the pieces together. And he had a vision that allowed him, well, if I put him over there, he'll support this guy over here or her. He was just awesome in the way he could, and I was fascinated by it, coming up through the leadership ranks in the Navy, and I just never seen anybody like him. It was just amazing.
Very interesting man. We enjoyed talking about it here. He went to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, ROTC training, University of Washington. Got his master's degree in electrical engineering at U.S. Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson. And I mentioned that by way of his education wasn't like a stellar institutionalized education. This guy just had some good common sense, it sounds like.
He wasn't. He didn't engineer things. He common sense answers to things, and
Well, we're enjoying this conversation. I got a couple more comments here. Hi, Jay and Mike. This is Kevin. Please tell the story about when George was out of town and you had to check on the car in his garage.
Well, that's
actually it was me in Germany.
yeah.
He had this Lincoln, and the damn Lincoln was as long as this room is, and it was in the garage, and the garage had a mother-in-law kind of a room over, and the car was so long that when he was in there and the garage door was down, the door to go in the garage, which opened inward, would only open about that far because it hit the bumper of the car. So he goes off to Seattle and tells Germany now to get in there and get the Lincoln out of the, fix the garage door so the Lincoln would come up. So we go upstairs and the room wasn't finished up there except it had a plywood floor. So we start prying up the plywood floor, and the Nassau Bay cops show up. Mr. Abbey? And Mr. Abbey's not here. Yeah, we know he's not. Who are you? And so we tell him this story, and he said, well, Mr. Abbey left this message here. I'm just going to call him up and ask him. So they call up George, and he said, these two guys here are breaking into your house. And George says, I never heard of those guys. So as they were starting to put the handcuffs on him, he called the guy back and he said it was a joke.
Really? He let you sweat it out that much, huh? Heard the jingle of the handcuffs there.
There's a second car story, though.
Uh-huh.
Is Andrew on?
Yeah.
So Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew's on, and yes, they are.
So Andrew, do you remember your Lincoln story in the
James
swamp?
and Andrew and Joyce are all watching together.
Okay. So Adamson comes into my office and said, George just called. His Lincoln is in the swamp, and you guys go get it. Middle of the day, life's going on, got a class, got this. So we leave. And I was on my motorcycle. We went over on the motorcycle. We got back in the swamp and realized we needed Jim's truck. Took a whole day off to get it, but Andrew, we got it back to you. I don't know if George let you drive it or not.
And Joyce says, thank you. And this was Mr. Honeycutt's idea, Joyce, for sure. love Jay and love Mike. Give him Joyce's love there. So Marty's got maybe a final question here from a George Abbey.
George is asking, do you have a personal story or reflection that captures Dad's character or leadership? For example, he champions strategies like consolidating operations.
Who's that from?
George Jr.
George's son, George.
Right.
Wait, say the question again.
Okay. Do you
A story that captures Dad's character or leadership. He says something about his strategies for consolidating operations, and you talked about several things there. For example, he took Space Station Freedom and made it an international space station. Correct.
Well, in those Saturday meetings, I mean, he would see a problem and have a vision about how to fix it, like the space station and the Saturday morning meetings and all those things. And he would bring the people together, which was probably the key. He didn't try to make all the decisions, but he would get the people together and basically force them
Seesaw.
to work the problem.
George has mentioned CSOC and USA.
Yeah. Well,
I've heard of you involved with CSOC. We've not talked about that. What was that?
what was this combined space operations contract or
It
something?
was Dan Golden decided the agency should have one contract to do all the communication stuff, all the, it was called the Consolidated Space Operations Contract, and it was underway when I went to work at Lockheed Martin. And basically the proposal was done, and this is, and what it had was, it had the winning center, or the winning center contract would manage the other center, Marshall's, Goddard's, and Kennedy's communication stuff. Well, I took one look at it. I said, this ain't gonna work. You know, I mean, we get along with the Russians better than we get along with each other, and turns out that's the way it turned out, because the centers wouldn't. The centers fought us tooth and nail, and as soon as it was like a 5-year with a 5-year follow on, and when the 5 years was up, they didn't renew the contract because the other centers were just against it. It was not a good idea to begin with.
Well, I think that good point to tell everybody thank you for being participants in this tribute. I'm so happy the Abbey family joined us today. Jay Honeycutt, thank you for offering this program to Stay Curious. And again, Mike McCulley, so great to see you here. Always willing to do things for us, but now, as you told me about a year and a half ago after Astronaut Memorial, glad that you and Jane are trying to be fully retired and enjoy life, because you've done so much for the community, the shuttle era. And Jay, thank you for all that you're doing. Again, that we are going to have a dinner with Jay. Put that up there if you're local. A couple pictures, Mr. Abbey. I always like his smile there. He's always got a kind of a nice smile there. There's a tribute there. We're going to have Jay at our NASA's Legends dinner. You want to get to meet him and hear some things he says in public. It's not going to be broadcast anywhere, Jay, so you can freewheel some of your thoughts about where the direction NASA's going. Yes, sir.
Quick note on Jane. She was a teller in the credit union.
Your wife, Jane.
Jane, at the Johnson Space Center. When George came in, he wouldn't talk to anybody except her.
Oh, really?
And so sometimes that gave her little problems among her staff there. But they were really close, George and Jane were.
Well,
There was only one George Abbey, There'll never be another one.
Yep.
And thank you. Like has been said, you can't write the history of the American space program without including George Abbey in it, or in my opinion, these two gentlemen also.
I do I recommend Saul's book though, because it's
Yes, we have
very well
some Michael Calsalt's book, The Astronaut Maker, how one
yeah.
mysterious engineer ran human space flight for a generation, about Mr. George Abbey.
They call him Uno
Uno.
because you'd see these pictures of the crew coming out of the crew quarters, getting in the van to go to the pad for launch, and George always basically hosted them up there in that room, and it was always the crew and an unidentified NASA official, so they gave him
Always George.
nickname was Uno.
That's a good. So many stories. We'll talk more.
Thank you, Mark.
We will not forget the George Abbey and do more programs on here. Thanks, guys. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. I'm taking tomorrow off to be at an all-day conference at the Radisson that the Palm Bay Area Chamber of Commerce is hosting. Marty will do a rerun on the Russian space station Buran by our friend Gary Allgaier. So Gary really was into the Buran spacecraft. He's going to tell you all about it on a rerun there that Marty's going to set up for us there. So thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thanks for
I'm
the
Mark
opportunity.
Marquette saying
you.
we can't wait to see you again to bridge the space between us. Thank you.